given so many tongue-in-cheek, frivolous talks from this stage over the years that I don't really know what it feels like to say anything serious. I've never done it. I've never even asked people to turn off their cell phones. It's an entirely new experience. And I will say at the outset, with no exaggeration, that the job I've had is the best job in music. There is, that is if you are interested in teaching and composing and performing, there is really no better situation in which to carry on those activities. This is because I've had students that are wonderfully gifted and intelligent, and also, and this is sort of an important thing from my point of view, they're at a stage where they're not sure what they're going to do. It's not a conservatory, it's not professional preparation, so they're in a state, you know, and that is one that I was so familiar with. It's, I'm extremely sympathetic to it. And then there's the faculty, which there's no mystery as to why I've hung on to this job for 50 years. The real mystery is how I found myself in it in the first place. Because, and you can trust me about this, there had to have been more qualified candidates at the time. And it's kind of hard to tell the whole story in a few minutes. And you'll be happy to know I'm not going to start in 1941. But let me start in 1959. I'm a freshman. I am at a university with terrible pianos, and I find one in the lounge, or the sitting room, of the freshman union, which was the freshman eating facility. And I'm practicing on this piano. It was about the quality of our worst pianos in the practice rooms, but it was the only thing I could find. And so I'm practicing the first movement of a Mozart concerto, the Coronation Concerto. It's a piece that just the first, I only knew the first movement, and that was something I had played in high school in Willoughby, Ohio, an eastern suburb, where there was a community orchestra, and I was second on the program. The only thing memorable about this event was that the first piece was a Baroque cantata excerpt, and they had hired two ringers from the Cleveland Orchestra, cello and bass, to come in for the performance of this first piece. And then, of course, they played in the Mozart. Well, the conductor had neglected to tell those players about the cuts in the first piece. And I'm off stage very nervous, as always, and I hear the piece sort of stop, but the bass line keeps moving. And it went on. I look out, peek out, and there's his name was Mr. Savage, and he's going. And they paid no attention. They were professionals. They were hired to play every note. Mr. Savage is a total wreck when he comes off the stage. I am, anyway, a total wreck, so I don't know what our performance could have amounted to of that Mozart. But anyway, I'm still trying to learn it. And there is a man sitting near the piano, and his name is Owen Jander. And he's in the last stage of the PhD program at Harvard. He's a Stradella expert. I seem to have been privileged to know the two world's leading Stradella experts. Owen would later become a Beethoven, quite well known in the Beethoven field. And he would also, later than the event I'm speaking of, he became full professor at Wellesley, where he was Fran Ferguson's favorite teacher, and they were great friends. But all that was much later to come. And he's sitting there trying to read the newspaper, and I'm struggling with this Mozart, and he says, you know, you ought to enter this concerto competition that they're having. Now, I was there, I have to say, I was a pre-medical program. And it was my intention to go to medical school, and in the course of time I was admitted to medical school, but I was not sure what I would major in. They say concentrate, something. I didn't really know what that was going to be, and obviously music was one of the candidates for that, but he says, you ought to, they're having this competition. The trouble is, the competition was the next day. Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra, you know, etc. So, and it's kind of hard to believe, but I waited until midnight. I had somehow secured the phone number of the young conductor of the orchestra, Michael Centuria, and I hemmed and hawed to the point, finally have decided, well, maybe call him and see if can I add my name to the list. And he says, well, if you must, I'll So I turn up at this event, and to my horror, there's Dr. Wolf, Kenneth Wolf. Well, here's a man, he was from Cleveland, where I'm from. So the reason I know about him is that he got all kinds of attention. He was a prodigy who had, I think, graduated from the Yale School of Music at the age of 11, and he knew the entire repertoire of the piano from memory, and could multiply 5-digit numbers in his head. And he's there, and he's playing the Brahms D minor, my favorite piece at the time, and he's good. I had never wanted to ever lay eyes on this man. Such was my resentment for the multiplying the numbers in his head. And here he is playing and I couldn't play the Brahms, and he's playing it, and I'm wondering, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. Anyway, I'm at the end finally, and this is all in public. I mean, there was a small audience, and it's an auditorium like this. And I go up, and there's no accompaniment, of course, there's nobody playing the orchestral part. So I manage the theme, and then there's some passage work that starts with a scale, and I start up the scale and get totally tangled up, and I stop. And I start up the scale again, and I get tangled up. I thought, this is really... So the third time I go, and it gets... I manage to continue. I get all the way through the cadenza, and I end, and I think, let me get out of here as fast as possible. So I get my coat, I'm half out the door when they announce I've won the cadenza. Now, I thought, they don't know what they're doing. And then it hits me, I'm going to have to learn the other two movements and play it in a public situation. Now, the reason I won was a woman named Louise Vassar. She was a pianist, very well known in Boston, had been a protege of Nadia Boulanger in Paris, and at the time she was an adjunct in the Harvard Music Department. She would later become full professor and chair of the department, but at the time I'm talking, she was teaching the skills courses, what we would, ear training and skills courses. I had never met her, but she became a remarkably influential figure in my life. I didn't have any idea this was going to happen, of course. And I was in this daze. I mean, I was terrified. I'm going to have to perform this. I don't know what I'm going to do. The next night, I go on a blind date at Wellesley. I don't remember the name of the young woman, but she had the idea that we were going to dance because it was called a dance. But no, that wasn't my idea. I had to explain to her that this run can start with the thumb or with the second finger, and depending on how you place the thumb, and if you don't, you could mix up, and that could be why I messed up. Did I tell you I messed it up the second time? And did I mention Dr. Wolf was there? He's from Cleveland. Have you ever heard the Cleveland Orchestra? George Zell, he was playing the Brahms, and really, the young woman early in the evening, very early, goes to the ladies' room, never comes back. She may have killed herself. I hope so. I spent the rest of the evening muttering to myself. Anyway, I did learn the other two movements. I did play the concerto. I did then get a stipend to go to Aspen, where I reconnected with a quite big-name pianist, Leonard Schur, whom I had had some lessons with in Cleveland. He had moved to New York. He wanted me to stay studying with him in New York, so I arranged to come down every 2 weeks from Harvard to have a lesson. When my pal David Botstein heard of this, he said, "Come stay with us at our house. We have a wonderful piano you can practice on. I have a nice younger sister named Eva." He didn't mention that he had a younger brother named Leon Botstein. Leon was 13. He's very active at the moment up at Bard, or I wouldn't, now I can talk about him. Leon would help me practice. I would play something and he'd say, "That's not how Sirkin does it." Right? I would stop and he'd say, "Why did you stop? Did you forget?" Needless to say, we have been incredibly close friends for 56 years, really, and collaborated on many things and so on. All a matter of this kind of chance situation. Well, when I was ready to graduate from college, Louise Vassar gets me a traveling fellowship to go to Europe. It was $3,600 in those days. It doesn't seem like much now, but it was a lot of money. It was quite a bit more than other traveling fellowships. And it was entirely her doing. As she would later get me at the position of Pierre Bernac's accompanist at Dartmouth, where I would meet Martin Cannon and then run into him months later at a concert in New York and say, I think, by this time I'm here, and I'm saying we're looking for a piano teacher, and he says, there's a person named Blanca Uribe that I would like you to know about. I also, from Louise Vassar, got the chance to teach at Chautauqua, and as I will get to, she played a major role in getting me this position at Vassar. Anyway, I go to Europe. I am studying in Munich with a Friedrich Wührer, a teacher. And by the way, I had asked the medical school, Harvard Medical School, to let me have a year to think about all this. They should never have admitted me. And the only reason they did was I was an hour late for the interview, and they had never had anybody late for an interview at Harvard Medical School. And the reason I was late is I didn't know where the medical school was. And I thought it was right there, but it's not. It's not. And so that option, that path was still open. I had said nothing about composition. I had a wonderful mentor at Harvard named Robert Mapes. I had heard a piece of his at the Cleveland Orchestra when I was in high school. And then I wound up in his, as a freshman in his second year harmony class. That's another weird thing. I was too readily passed out of the first year harmony with some simple test, which means that the course that I've mainly been teaching for 50 years is one I never had myself. And I don't know what I'm supposed to have been teaching in it because I skipped it, and that I shouldn't have done. But if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have met Robert as a freshman, and I went into his class as a senior. And at the time I'm speaking of, I'm in Munich, and President Kennedy is shot. Very depressing for Americans who are abroad. And I write to Robert, who was at the American Academy at Rome at that point, and say, I've been learning a piece of yours, very difficult piece called Fantasia, and I'd like to play it for you. And he says, come down, play a recital at the American Academy. I do, play the Waldstein, a few other things, and they say, would you like to live? Come down here, stay, leave Munich. You can pay a little for the food, but we've got a studio with a good piano, and what about that? And so I decided to do that, 7, 8 months. And I didn't realize at the time that Robert Mapes, who had not been given tenure at Harvard, was really basically without a job himself. He had a Guggenheim Fellowship. But the two of us are sitting there at a certain point, he's trying to coach me a little bit as to whether I should go to the medical school or not. And it kind of been easy for him because he didn't have a job at the moment, and can you make $3,600 in the music world? And we kind of thought maybe I could. So I turned down the medical school. The fellowship that I had was renewable for a second year. Robert disappears for a few days, comes back. He's now been named full professor at Rutgers University. I'm waiting for the letter to tell me that my fellowship has been renewed. It comes, and it says my fellowship is not being renewed. The automatic renewal wasn't that automatic. By this time, it was too late to apply to graduate school. I couldn't go. I'd said no to the medical school. And I said, well, if you're going to Rutgers, maybe I could tag along and do something there, get a master's degree, I guess. And so he set that up, and I did that. And in the spring of 1965, not spring, no, what am I talking about? It was Thanksgiving. The senior professor of this department, Carl Parrish, was killed in a car crash on the Taconic. And he had been teaching music history, and there was a woman named, then called Betty Churgan, now we call her Batia Churgan, but she was teaching harmony, but she really wanted to be teaching music history, so they moved her over and invented a position in music theory. Well, Robert Middleton, who was the other senior figure here in composition theory, who just died really a short time ago, he writes to his close friend Louise Vassar. They had known each other studying with Boulanger in Paris, and says, do you have any ideas who might take this job? And she suggests me. Batia Churgan writes to her friend Henry Kaufman, who was a co-student with her in the graduate program at Harvard, and he by now is the head of the music department at Rutgers. And she asks him for advice, and he suggests me. And then Robert Mapes gets into the mix, and he had been studying with Boulanger in Paris with Louise Vassar. And then Elliott Forbes, I didn't even say that I was accompanying the Harvard Glee Club. My great friend Don Lindsay is here. We went around the world together in 1961, during which time I became really almost a family member of Elliott Forbes and his wife Kay. They had 3 daughters, no son, and I really became very close with them. And of course, Kay Forbes had been a music major at Vassar. So the Forbeses knew all of the people here, he having studied with Nadia Boulanger. Nadia Boulanger hovers over me here. I did not study with her, though I did play for her in Baltimore, and she had apparently said something favorable to Al, who quoted it to everybody that I knew. And this isn't how it's done anymore. In the modern day, and quite rightly, this job would have been advertised. We would have a wide range of applicants, and you would sort it down. But this is 50 years ago, and that's how it all happened. To my great benefit, because, as I say, it's such a lucky thing. Now, before I lose it again, let me talk about Transfigured Goat. This is the thing. We had a wonderful sabbatical in England in London in 1983-84, and got to know John Lahr, who is the executor of the Joe Orton estate, but was the biographer of Joe Orton and editor of the letters of Joe Orton. And that's when I became acquainted with his plays. I love the plays. They're extremely funny. And there was always a favorite bit in them. I think of Loot or What the Butler Saw. And so I'd written this opera, comic opera, that I wasn't sure was a full evening, and I thought maybe it needs a 20-minute curtain raiser that two singers out of the cast of the opera could sing. And so I compiled these favorite bits from the different Orton plays, and I started to mess around with them, change the words, fit it somehow into something that I wanted to set. And then I thought, well, I'm going to get in trouble with John Lahr because I'm changing Joe Orton's words. But if I weave references to our dog through the text, he will get so confused by that. There are no dogs in Joe Orton, so it's not. It'll get by his, as it has. He hasn't complained about this. And my relationship with the dog was so accusatory. I always accused her of one thing and another, including not being a dog, that she'd gotten her job as dog under false pretenses, that she was really a goat dressed up as a dog. And it all makes perfect sense. And what we're going to do now, which is quite unusual, is my wonderful colleagues are going to read the scenes from which the bits I made the libretto out of come from. And once you've heard that, the piece will just explain itself.